Welcome again to Imperium Art. This is episode 57. Before I introduce our special guest this evening, I want to share a thought. When I first became aware of Antifa during their rioting when Trump was elected, I was curious about the meaning of their name, anti-fascist. At first, I was confused because, as far as I knew, there were no fascists in the world since World War II. So they seemed like a LARPing band of disgruntled youth who could not accept that Trump won and were pretending to be a legitimate movement. Then, as I learned that they are a Marxist domestic terrorist group supported by the Democrat Party and funded by international globalists with a history that goes back to World War II, it occurred to me, if these are the enemies of America, enemies of freedom, then what they oppose must be good. It's the law of opposites, right? For example, if my enemy hates X, then the opposite of X must be something worth investigating. So at the time, I believed fascism was what everybody who grew up in our Asian system believes. But in fact, I had no education about it at all, only assumptions. At first, I was interested in the speeches of Sir Isaac Mosley, and then linked out to a network of artists and philosophers that revealed something totally different from what I had assumed fascism to be. A natural curiosity and not taking the status quo for granted, I came to learn more about the true history of World War II and how that forms the socio-political dialectic and conditions we live in today. With that, I found the YouTube channel of our special guest, Cultured Thug. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. How are you this evening?
I'm doing pretty good, Donald. Thank you for having me on.
That is a real honor to have you here. You produce incredible work, and I've been watching your channel for quite a while, and it's just been so enlightening. Really a huge fan of the audiobooks that you're doing now. I think they're critical to the education and historic component of understanding fascism and our Western history as well. So let me
Yes.
also introduce, go ahead, let me quickly introduce my
Mhm.
co-host and really good friend, Nullis. How are you, my friend?
Hello, Donald. Hello to the audience. And it's a special honor to have you here with us, Culture Thud. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. But and it's funny about your intro, like your own progression into this. That's
Mhm.
why the whole Culture Thug channel was created, simply because
Hmm.
people really didn't know that you couldn't go to school or turn on documentaries and actually learn about the actual politics and philosophy that was the third position, that was fascism.
Mhm.
So, and I saw so many people so ignorant to it, like living up to Hollywood tropes. So I
Yeah.
got started in 2013 with the Culture Thug channel, and it just started making those kind of Spark
Mhm.
Notes audiobooks on breakdowns of this philosophy and where it comes
Mhm.
from, why it exists, what it's against, and simply to educate, because I was frustrated having, seeing all these people live up to tropes. I was like, I'll at least put the information out there and people will
Yeah.
stumble across it. At least I can get that off of my chest. Like, I put the education
Mhm.
out there for people to make up their own mind. So I've
Mhm.
heard a lot of people reach out like that too. Like, oh, I stumbled on this. I didn't know what it was. And then they start watching the videos, the audiobook breakdowns, and you're
Yeah.
hearing from the source. That's what I always loved doing. It was
Mm.
never about me. It was about the source, presenting the source to the people.
Sure, sure, sure. It's extraordinary. Your site is a treasure trove of information on so many levels as well. There's just, you've got culture, political platform, books, contributors. It's, I would say, an essential website for all of my followers to subscribe to. So newfrontierusa.org. And
Yes.
yeah, it's just it's quite extraordinary. So yeah, we kind of start off here with some basic questions. So again, where I always advocate for people who are new to my show and new to the guest, so that we try to give them a real simple understanding of who you are and what you do, presuming that they don't know anything. So start off in a few sentences. Simply, what is fascism?
Well, fascism is people say reactionary, but it is something that rejected the first two positions, being capitalism and socialist Marxism of the modern age. The last two positions of that. So third position started from there because it disagreed with the internationalism of capitalism and the liberalism attached to it. And it also disagreed with the pure state control and blanding everyone of Marxism. So it had something that was socialistic in a sense, collectivist, let's say, is a better thing as
Mm-hmm.
far as economy, and then also nationhood too, which is another form of collectiveness. So it was a rejection to the individualistic and the universal
Mm-hmm.
political theories that were gaining the strength at the time. So
Mm-hmm.
with on top of that, with building also, I think it kind of intertwines with your essay too, when you talk about the organic expression of like that's where art should come from. That's what culture is. And that is the same with like the third position. It's embracing that organic culture of the people that
Mm-hmm.
are part of that. So it's a
So,
representation of all three of those things.
okay, what is the relationship of fascism to the family?
Well, I mean, it's kind of all intertwined. I mean, I will go
Yeah.
to um, let's see. You're a fascist in right here. This is a quote for Giovanni Gentile from Origins and
Mm-hmm.
Doctrines of Fascism. He says,
Mm-hmm.
"Fascism is a party, a political doctrine, but fascism, insofar as it is a party political doctrine, it is before all else a conception of life. One cannot be a fascist in politics and not a fascist in school, not a fascist in one's own family, not a fascist in one's workplace. So it's this total conception. So it's intertwined because it is the expression of the people and with the intent on uh, continual advancement of a people, like an improvement, gaining something you could mark through the history of time, as you would
Okay.
see in some of the older empires and cultures that were around. So
Okay.
it's intertwined with everything, and obviously it's very family friendly. If you look at Italy and Germany during the time of Mussolini and Hitler, you see the birth
Mm-hmm.
rates rise, marriage rise, all of these things because it's very family orientated as far as having a strong family.
Mm-hmm. So this is fascinating. What is fascism's relationship to Christianity?
Well, that would depend on where this third position was coming from. You had groups like the Romanian Iron Guard, who were very
Mm-hmm.
Orthodox Christian. It was very intertwined with their
Mm-hmm.
politics, a
Mm-hmm.
dominant part of it, in fact. And then you have places where they're like Italy and Germany. Germany was a bit more secular, where the
Okay.
religion didn't create or um, wasn't the main driving force of the politics like it was in places like with the Phalange was much more Catholic orientated
Mm-hmm.
and Romania, like I said, much more orthodox. So it
Mm-hmm.
would because it is an organic political philosophy. It's not
Mm-hmm.
universal in a sense. Every country is going to express it in the same manner. I mean, just like a culture, because it is a part of the culture. It's the
Okay.
politics part of the culture expressed.
Okay. So my next question is, I think capitalism as putting the power in the hands of the corporations, and communism, Marxism, putting the power in the hands of the government. And so, where does fascism put the power?
Fascism puts the power essentially into the hands of the people, which is represented through the power, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's always going to be a hierarchy in
Yeah.
society. What fascism wants to do is have it a meritocratic hierarchy, that people
Okay.
that are there are the best leaders they can be, are
Mm-hmm.
getting the best results that they can be. So it is intertwining business and government with the government oversight with what is best for the people, what is best for the nation, being the driving factor of decisions of economy. It's not simply
Mm-hmm.
profit, profit, profit like it is under business, or
Right.
it's not
Right. Right.
simply the state central planning and forcing people to do things against their will like it is under communism. So
Right.
it intertwines with each other as far as oversight over a system, but with the mentality of what is best for the collective is the path we take, with economics and everything else. So many examples we would see. There are times the government has to step in and set prices. There are times when they have to get involved with export import, things like this, because there could be a problem could arise that could hurt the economy of the nation at the time. So it's a very free flowing kind of ebb and flow relationship between business and government under third position. But once again, with the mentality being what is best for the people.
Mm-hmm. Phenomenal. So here's the big $100 question. Why doesn't anyone seem to know what fascism really is?
Because they don't want us to know, obviously, because it is a true response and answer, I think, for the problems of today. It is something to counter this liberal system and this like cultural Marxist kind of mentality, this Frankfurt School Marxism we got in America today. It's something that actually counters that. It brings people together and it embraces, back to your article, about these points of um, violence through conviction. It's not this violence for violence sake. It's not this what like I like to call it like feminine violence. When someone robs you, it's for something material. If you look at someone wrong or these things and they get mad and they want to beat you up, it's because their emotions are out of whack, their ego's all messed up. Like, so they're in this kind of mentality. Violence for conviction is something that says, we will fight for something we believe in. And it's an honorable thing, right? It's something to be, that mentality is to be cherished. So this is one of the political philosophies that ties in with that as well. It's, we're going to win at any cost. Whatever path needs to be taken, we're going to win. So it has a very strong masculine mentality. And I think, part of that is you don't want to have that kind of political philosophy in this day and age, especially with liberalism and democracies. This is why every country that's even close to a third position becomes the enemy of democracy. Anything with authoritarianism, you'll notice, are the enemies of the world today, or on the bad list, of all the countries, because this is something that really challenges liberalism. This kind of masculine collective, all eyes set on, the goal of winning and changing society, and obsessed with that. That's a scary thing. That's a scary thing for democracy and liberalism.
There's so many examples that we could cite. I look at the way both the mainstream news and factions of the dissident right look at, say, Patriot, pretty example of kind of hyper masculine collectivist do or die spirit. And we're in a do or die situation, as the Western world is really kind of in a very, very critical state of survival. So when you're pushed against the wall, that's I think a natural response. An important question, though, that I think is very challenging for many people in the white positive sphere is, does fascism have to be racial, or is fascism, say specifically in America, something that could embrace more than white people?
Well, once again, it's an organic thing. So you would see somewhere like Germany, especially in the 20s, when it's like 97% ethnic German at the time, that it would make sense that it would be a racial thing there, or based off Germanness, right? So being an organic expression, we are in America here, not a true nation in the sense of the term, what a nation really is, but more of an empire. We're kind of born into this empire where I always look at it as the Roman model or the Ottoman model. We're kind of in that. We're a bunch of different people, kind of different cultures, different races, different religions, kind of thrown into this landmass, and with one federal government and media finance system that kind of oversees us. And so being born into that, my personal opinion, and I do get disagreement on this corner of the internet about this, but my personal belief is third position can only be expressed through a form of populism in this country. And then that American third position, or American fascism, if you will only come to light in the face of populism. So using that. So
Mm.
when we talk about populism, it means not kind of having an extreme view. If you live in a country where, in all reality, we're going to be demographically, we're going to be the majority minority in maybe less than 20 years. So
Mm.
it's using the populism to promote third position, because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is power as far as the situation we're in. Everything else, idealism, utopias and fantasies and all of this, it sounds good, but at the end of the day, the goal should be power, because that's the
Mm.
only way you change the course of not only America, but the West in general. I have the belief, if you can make America something that is third position, that frees up Europe to essentially free itself, I believe,
Mm. Mm. Mm.
if
This is
they
an
so
interesting.
wanted that.
Yeah, I actually agree with you on the populism uh, aspect, and I'm really fascinated on how fascism could organically grow in America in such a way as to serve the entire population that of people who I would call true Americans, not
Mhm.
illegal immigrants and people that aren't at all really from here or willing to, et cetera, et cetera. So that's separate from the entire topic of white genocide, which is a really critical central aspect of American Zarathustra, Imperium art, and all these other things. But I think the big elephant in the room in the dissident right is the unanswered question of, well, what do we do with generations of non-whites that have grown up with us in various, say, North America, for
I think the
example.
only pragmatic and realistic thing for this
Mhm.
country to deal with those
Mhm.
issues is freedom of association,
Okay.
not forced diversification. It's
Mhm.
because anything outside of that, once again, that puts you outside of populism back to the extreme, because that says, well, we're going to, they think of cattle cars and things like this. The
Yeah.
average person when they hear that. So freedom of association, I think, frees up this country to associate with who you want to associate with, and not
Naturally.
have like forced, diversity shoved down your throat, or not have
Sure.
outside communities, shoved into yours for no other reason but, for their
Okay.
purposeful demographic replacement and everything else that the government is currently doing and has been doing for quite some time now. So
Mhm.
yeah, I,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think through populism you get freedom of association, and this is how you get the best race relations in this country.
Excellent. That's an important thing to contemplate for the future, and maybe a topic for a panel discussion too. Actually, that'd be an interesting endeavor.
Yeah.
So another question to help the audience understand fascism, what we're talking about today. Who are the historic opponents of fascism, and why do they oppose it?
Well, it was obviously democratic capitalism and Marxian communism.
Okay.
Why do they oppose it? I mean, well,
Yeah.
obviously, why the capitalist side opposes it is it attacks the mentality of economics simply for profit, right?
Mhm.
We live in an age now where we have all this technology, this wonderful technology, and it's continuing to grow and advance, but it's mainly done for consumer purposes. And so now you
Mhm.
see we are, essentially just nothing but consumers, face in the
Mhm.
phone, or face in the computer, or face on the streaming site all day long, just consuming. And yeah, our
Mhm.
streams get better, the phones, we get the next generation phone or gaming console, etc., but it's
Mhm.
all just to keep us consumers, when technology should be used to advance us, right? We should be beyond Mars by now. I mean, it's
Yeah.
ridiculous what we use this technology for. So, well,
Mhm.
but that's kind of going off point here. But so capitalism, that wouldn't work under capitalism. That wouldn't be best for profit. When you have a collective economic effort to purposefully advance yourself in whatever direction people choose, like if the space programs it, that's fine, but the resources and the technology is headed in that direction, in a unified effort, so you can get the best chance of success. So
Mhm.
that doesn't work underneath the capitalist system. So of course they're always going to hate that. The bankers, The corporate oligarchies, they don't want bosses over them. Like, they want to tell the politicians what to do. And that's why democracy is so great. It's so easy to divide the people under democracy. And we see that in every democracy. It's just a
Yeah.
mass of people fighting with each other over every topic. And so this
Mhm.
is what democracy creates. So it keeps the people in power, while it keeps the plebs at each other's throats over numerous different issues. And so
Mhm.
third position unifies the people,
Yes, yeah.
focused in a
So,
single direction.
you know, fasces, to fasten, unity.
Yes.
That's the kind of linguistic connection there.
Yes.
Under I used to talk to people about nationalism under Trump to try to get them to kind of snap out of the I don't know, the Trump delirium, if you will, where he would always measure the health of America by the GDP, by our
Hmm.
economics. Oh, we're winning and we're winning. And meanwhile, you look at the cancer of cultural Marxism growing and growing and growing. And how are we winning? Who's winning here? So it's kind of capitalism left unchecked is essentially a parasitism, I guess, of the people, in that we
Hmm.
become, the meaning of our lives just becomes work and money, and that's anti-spiritual. And interestingly, the sort of Republicans are very closely associated with Christianity and spirituality in that regard, and yet they can't see this connection. They like, just go to church on Sunday and the rest of the week work your ass off, and
Hmm.
that kind of thing. So I think for most people, it seems fairly easy to point out what's wrong with communism, Marxism, but it's very hard to get them to admit or see what's wrong with capitalism. Because they see it as a choice. It's one or the other. It's Democrat or
Yes.
Republican, communism or, and so no, there's this called third position.
Well, that's the thing.
And
The ignorance is why I've always held the belief that most Americans are fascists. They just don't know it yet. So I looked
I
at
love
myself as,
that. I think,
yeah, I looked at myself as
yeah,
preaching the gospel.
yes. So that, I think you should be known for that quote. Most Americans are fascists; they just don't know it yet. I think that we're going to
Yeah.
attribute that to you. Somebody get on that right away and start memeing that.
Yeah.
Let
Hey,
me
real
hand the
fast
mic
though,
over.
I'm going to pivot. I have to pivot because I know you wanted to talk about the essay a little later, but you just touched on something that I wanted to
Okay.
bring up with you about it. And it was the reference to the book Ugly as Sin, why they changed our churches from sacred places to meeting spaces, and how can we
Mm,
change them back again. And so
mm,
this is first kind of what you're talking about with like the Republicans and their religion. Um,
yeah.
I guess it's once you commodify the churches, essentially, once you cookie cutter the churches, just like everything else under capitalism, right? Mass production now on this, that
Yeah.
maybe you do take kind of the spirit out of it now. Maybe it's easier to distance yourself from like the true connection, to that cosmic energy that was intertwined in European Christianity for thousands of years. It's like, so
Mm,
maybe it is kind of a degrading of the process of the art they put into it, the expression of themselves they put into it, that cosmic
mhm,
divine that they saw in the work they were representing. So
mm,
maybe that ties into kind of why it's so easy now to have these Christians who are Christian in name only. It's like you
yeah.
said, it's something work Monday through Friday, drink on
Yeah.
Saturday, watch the game,
Yes.
and then go to church on Sunday. I mean, that's kind of
I
this
think
repetitive
they're
pattern.
called churchians, I think is the word.
Churchians, yeah.
Just kind of a joke, but and I think Christians came with that term, to sort of criticize people who don't really, practice the faith. But I let me hand the mic over to Nullis real quick. I just like to share the mic a little bit here. Do you have any thoughts or comments or questions, Nullis?
I have a few actually, and I'll just comment on this last one. And I'll start there first with the ugliest sin and how, in essence, the soul of the church was sucked out through. And I personally don't think it was capitalism per se. I think capitalism is a mode, is a method. I don't consider capitalism an ideology per se. I think it started with liberalism, with the Enlightenment, really.
Yes, yes.
And so when we take it that far back, and this whole concept of the separation of church and state created this excuse for people to separate their morality. My church morality is different than my business morality, for example. My work ethic is different than my family ethic. My so it gave people an excuse to compartmentalize their morality, and I think that this was a great disservice to humanity, whereby some people might argue that what I'm advocating for is a theocracy, and I'm not saying that, and I don't think that that's what this is about. But when you separate the morality of what the church is supposed to represent with statecraft and with your social fabric, then what you get at the end is this mass that you could just form any way you want, because there are no absolutes. Man is above everything else. Man is the absolute then, and man is flawed. And since man is flawed, you're always going to have changes, and you're always going to have excuses to do whatever it is you want to do. And of course, you can add to the Machiavellian aspect of everything, which then, of course, intensifies this concept even further. But I just wanted to add to that. And I think that, but I'm not saying capitalism, I'm not trying to defend capitalism. I'm just simply saying that capitalism in and of itself I look at it more as a tool, as a weapon, if you will. It's not necessarily something alone. It's just an objective thing. It's there, and we can use it in a positive way, or we could use it in a negative way. But if you combine it with this enlightened humanist approach to everything, to morality, then the whole concept of capitalism becomes what it is today, at least in my view. And again, we can go into the details of the capitalist model, and there are pros, cons to everything. But I think what I'll do here is I'll play the devil's advocate for a minute. And I'm not representative of this idea. I want to qualify this. But what's your position to the conservative critique that fascism is, quote, essentially just another left-wing socialist ideology? And then I want to continue before, just keep that thought. And I just want to add two more comments, and then I'll let you, go at me. Okay.
Okay.
So my position, generally speaking, is identity always trumps ideology. That's why I always take the foundation as the organic understanding of self and of community. And I firmly believe that ideology is very important. So this is not to say that ideology is not important. Well, what it is that I'm saying is that you have to know who you are before you can then subscribe to a particular ideology. And by knowing who you are, you will automatically gravitate toward the ideology that works for you and not against you. And I think that, so a third position in this case is an organic expression of that. I think that it doesn't work against you or us as a community. And I think that if we take it from that point of view, then there are very strong elements in fascism that I think that are crucial to our continued success and our survival going forward. And then you have others, conversely, like, for example, communism and socialism and what have you, that are an anathema to who we are. And it's designed to destruct and deconstruct and destroy us. And then my final thought is just wanted to add that relatability, I think, that you mentioned, and I think this is, you perfectly said it, I think, where you said that each country has a different expression of how they express this third position. And I think it's very important that we focus on what is relatable to a particular country, a particular region, because that's our organic expression. So people, they'll find the natural connection to that political expression if you can have a certain level of relatability attached to it. Mm-hmm. And so I know I said a lot, so I'm just going to let you just go at it.
Okay. So I think we started with, what is the response to the conservative that says this is just left-wing socialism?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, first, that socialism is not left-wing. So socialism is something that Marx made just like, you're correct. Capitalism is a tool, a creation of the Enlightenment period, which I refer to as the Dark Ages, but they call it the Enlightenment period. So it's a tool of that, just like socialism is also a tool of, you could say, much older communities where they learned, even at a tribal level, everyone had to contribute so everyone could eat. So the men had to hunt while the women picked. It's as simple as that. Like, that was our first understanding of what we can call socialism. Now I know it's a dirty word, it's associated with the left, but we have people like Spangler who did a great job of showing Prussian socialism, this socialism that existed before this Marxian narrative that was simply about the community and about merit and about the best people getting to the best positions because they contribute the most to their community in those positions. And so I would push back on that. It's a leftist thing. I would say that this is a human dynamic thing. What's being created is essentially capitalism. When I mean capitalism, I'm not talking about the processes of each business or the interactions between them. What I'm talking about is essentially, it's not a tool, but there is a philosophical belief to it, and that is, if it makes profit, it's good. If it doesn't make profit, it's bad. And that is the morality of capitalism. So it's on that level. This is something that I would say it's more than just a tool, because it reduces everything to a certain outcome that's material. And when you have a true, once again, I don't even like to use the term socialist because it's probably not even the correct term. This intertwined kind of working with the people. It's more nationalism. It's like that's true. The economic mentality of it. It's more collectivism. It's, instead of simply moralizing if it's good and materializing it, whether it makes profit or not. Now you put the soul into it. You put the spirit into it. This is a representation of this community, and the end goal of this is to make this community stronger, better, smarter. So it's I would say, like, it's, as far as a left-wing thing, yes, it's hijacked, it's known as that. For the same reason no one knows what third position is in, like, the mainstream world, is the same reason why we think socialism is inherently a left-wing thing, when I would argue it's just a part of our human dynamic. We figured it out a long time ago. To have a strong community, everyone had to contribute, and everyone got from that contributing too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think even if you go back into the medieval era or before, there was always a social component involved, a social responsibility involved in the fabric of the society. And I think that the German term "sozial," which is social, is not necessarily equal to the term "sozialist," which is socialist.
Mhm.
And I think that the way we can help define this, and again, I agree with you completely on this, but I think that, and you accurately said that they've hijacked a lot of these terms, and they've twisted a lot of these terms. They've twisted what fascism means. Now everything is fascist. Everything
Yeah.
is equated by this false 20th century mythology, where both the West and the East are competing for the middle on virtue signaling. I mean, that's really what's happening. And they're both basically polar opposites of what the third position represents. So for both of them, they shore up their resources against the third position in many ways, if you will. And so I think that this is a very important point. But again, the only reason I brought this up is not to argue with you, but more for the audience's sake, to, if they ever encounter these arguments, especially from the conservative right side, where they go, well, everything is fascist. Well, what's your answer to that? Or when they say well, that's socialist. And then you have to have a good and intelligent, cogent answer to that, because people need to be educated. I think that's been decades of brainwashing and misinformation that we have to unravel, which is a huge task. And I think that it's important that we find methodologies, ways that we can simply answer this, even if it's in your family.
Yeah.
You might have an older your father, your uncle, they might be otherwise really good guys, and they're pretty much right wing on everything. But then when you bring up certain key terms, they have this knee jerk reaction to certain words or terms. And I think that it's up to us to kind of recontextualize it for them and give them a better understanding of what's going on.
Would you guys, because speaking about that too, it's not only that, but being like, having a concise short answer like a meme, a verbal meme, essentially, is kind of what's needed with that too, to make sense with the fewest use of words or the most common words you can use. Do you guys view propaganda as a form of art? I wonder.
You've touched upon a really good topic that we
You're,
always.
you're,
Oh, Donald, right? We talk about
you're,
this all the
you're
time.
Oh
turning,
yeah,
you're turning the tables on us, huh? I'm
yeah.
real
That's just what I mean. You know, this is
apples. I'm gonna say yes. I'm gonna say
I'm
yes.
also going to say I'm going to also say yes, but I'm going to qualify it because I'm going to say that propaganda can be art. Is all propaganda art? No, it's not. But propaganda can be can be art, I think, and I think
I
that
agree. Yeah,
there's an artistic value to propaganda. Absolutely.
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll say, like, many people know I lived in Asia for 5 years, and aesthetically, I love Chinese communist propaganda paintings from the 1950s. They're beautiful. And I hate everything about communism. I abhor it, and I know the amazing, immeasurable amount of pain and suffering that Chinese people have gone through and are continuing to go through under communism. So there's no connection whatsoever in my mind about that. But it starts to become a question of defining propaganda, I guess. In a sense, everything is some kind of propaganda, I suppose.
Yeah.
If you're about trying to get people, everyone operates from their ego, and they just kind of want to make everyone else a version of them. And I hate that. As someone who studied Eastern philosophy, I see through that like glass. It's extremely easy, but it's also kind of an important and a natural part of being human in a sense. And it just, if it's a good thing, if it's about the collectivism, it's about, the strength of the whole, the family, and these kinds of things, then you're not going to use the word propaganda. But anyway, these are pretty interesting kinds of questions. So let's dive in then. Let's talk about your mission. What's your website and your mission all about, briefly?
So we've created a platform on there, and I guess it's as simple as this. I'll kind of go back to the start of it, how this even came about. And it was 2016. I had already like tapped out of even caring about politics or any of that stuff. I don't want to say black pilled, even though I guess I was defeatist minded, but living a very good life with my family, not on the internet as much anymore, much more time to focus on myself and do things to better myself. And I was actually having a very good personal time. Let me say, I was at best place spiritually, mentally, physically as well at the time. Then I kind of started I took a 3-year break from the internet completely. Then I came back as Culture Thug and started doing that, but just to put educational videos out there because it's a passion you can never turn off. Is how I felt as when I was firmly convinced, okay, this is the answer. I've been a fanatic ever since. So you can distance yourself, but you have to justify to yourself, am I doing something? Am I doing anything? So I thought the educational videos were the way to go. So but still not really paying attention to politics, not thinking I'm going to change the world or anything like that. Just mainly, I guess, for selfish reasons, to be able to say, well, okay, at least I'm doing something. I'm trying to educate people. So 2016 rolls around and we see Trump and Bernie. And at first, my initial reaction was, because I wasn't watching any of the debates or anything, was if that's exactly what America deserves, fucking Trump, right? It's because just growing up with knowing who Trump was, he was very famous throughout the 80s and 90s as this mogul and his kind of personality he had and everything. So I found it laughable at first that, he was running for president. People were telling me, no, you have to see what he's talking about and the reactions to it. And sure enough, I started seeing what he was talking about. I was like, okay, a lot of this sounds very populist, but the reaction to him is what very much filled me with optimism. Is like, oh, there is a crowd of people out here that they hear something similar. And I thought this same with the Bernie bros too. The first supporters of Bernie in 16, same thing. They were looking for the same kind of populism. Yeah, one was a little right populism, one was red populism, one was blue populism, but it was still this populist fervor that I didn't
Yeah.
think even existed in this country. I thought people were just going to play the same game over and over again until the wheels fall off this thing. But I saw
Mhm.
there was something different here. It's like, oh, there's a spark. So once again, trying to justify myself. Okay, if you really believe in this stuff, and our core tenet is thought and action. But you can't be a fascist if you're not willing to take some kind of action for it, especially like
Yeah.
in the vanguard of promoting this ideology or this
Yeah.
philosophy. And so I was like, well, if there's a populist base out there, and I can
Mm.
use third position populism, and I can't get across to people online because I'm banned all the time. They won't allow a
Yeah.
platform to build to where you have hundreds of thousands of people tuning in. That would make it so much easier to actually,
Mhm.
spread the idea and influence people to run for it on their own. Since we can't
Yeah.
have that, and I believe most people are fascists, they just don't know it yet. It's like, well, what else can I do to reach more people and see the reaction? So that
Okay.
was politics. That was get involved with politics, running for congressional seats,
Wow.
multiple people in different states, same time, to have the impact and to try to get the message out there. Because someone like me, I have a very bad record as far as what mainstream media would, they're going to call me everything under the sun, dude. If I get the attention, though, that's the good part, though. Funny enough, is
Mhm.
like that's what I'm looking to. It's like if I can't get the attention, then I'm not going to reach much more people than I can reach on, Odyssey or something, one of these,
Mhm.
alt media representations.
Yeah.
So the point is getting the message out there, trying to get the attention, and trying to position myself to being able to debate an incumbent or do anything like that, to put these ideas out there
Mm.
so I can
Mhm.
grow the understanding of third position. Even though no one's going to know third position, I'm not going to talk about third position. I'm going to talk about our platform, which comes from
Okay.
that mentality. So the
That
whole
makes sense.
goal of it is to try to reach more people than we can reach simply by online or
Yeah.
online activism or things like that. And I think the only way I can get the biggest megaphone I can get my hand on is by going into politics and putting myself out there and
Right.
essentially following the model every other third position did. It's just we haven't done it in this country, and it's
Mhm.
high time we start trying, because the times are not good for
Yeah.
us, but they're great for political revolution. Okay, so
Yes.
it,
Yeah. That definitely. Have you heard of American Reformation Front.org?
yes,
It's a Christian fascist group. Apparently, my understanding is that they are a legitimate party. I believe they're located in Texas, and they are running for various political seats. So that I think I want to reach out to them at some point to have them on American Zarathustra. Any
yeah.
thoughts on them?
I don't really know anything about them, to be honest with you.
Okay.
There used to be something called the American Black Shirts. Then
Mm.
they split, and one side went more. And I always argued they were, we didn't have the best of relationships. I always argued they were just conservatives playing fascist, and it
Okay.
ended up to be right in the end, because they split and their leader went to like just a conservative type thing. And I think that's where the other thing you're talking about comes from. Maybe I could
Okay.
be wrong about that, but
Mhm.
I've seen their website. I looked at some of their platform, and
Mhm.
if people are running, but they're running for like, it's not the model that I agree with. That's why we're going to run for federal seats
Yeah.
for
Okay.
attention, because
I
I,
see.
I don't think you can play a small game anymore in this country. I personally believe like we have a decade to turn this ship, or there's not much turning that we're going to run right into the iceberg or whatever. It's
Yeah.
so getting, I mean, anyone running for anything, more power to you. So I wish them nothing but success. But I
Okay.
think I don't know. I think we should be more unified and uh, you know mind set on the goal, a same goal. So I guess this long
Right.
way of saying they should just join New Frontier and not they should just get in with what we're doing. And then I don't
Well,
know about all this. Like, we'll run for
I
local
think
stuff here.
yeah, this is a discussion that I kind of want to dedicate my channel to in the coming year, and we'll see where that goes. But I want to kind of veer back on course with the show here. So let me ask you, what role do artists and creators play in a fascist state? Can you cite examples of artists, architects? I know that art history isn't like your field, so no pressure there. But I'm just curious if at least you could give the artists listening to this show, musicians, creators, poets, etc., what what's our relationship to fascism and the state and the people?
Well, it's vital. First off, it is vital because
Mm.
once again, the artist kind of bring the metaphysical to the physical for us, right?
Okay.
Like they do this. So, of course, that's heavily intertwined. And we can even go through like how they started banning degenerate art and they wanted
Yeah.
a more organic and classical and beautiful kind of representation of art instead of the art of the ugly, which got
Yeah.
popular at that time. So, obviously, it's important when you have to even censor art to an extent or um, completely dismiss it and say this represents us and we can't have this something that's ugly or destructive or negative being the thing that influences and kind of explains us to the world. You can see
Hmm.
how that wouldn't work out, with the psyche of a people. But as far as their importance, I mean, like back to those Chinese propaganda posters, I mean, I could be mistaken, but I think they're all very similar to what the Germans did and what the Italians did. They had a very
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
specific form of
That's quite
propaganda.
right.
Yeah.
It's very idealistic. It shows like the
Yes.
people are this the family and the love of one's nation and people. Of course, that's a sick, twisted way of selling communism, which is
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
obviously the opposite of
Yeah.
that, right? But
But they
anyway, go
create
on.
the symbols. Yeah, the artists create the symbols and people relate to the symbols. And there's argument whether that's a good thing or bad thing that people can relate, solely through or mostly through symbols or not. But
Mhm.
they create the symbols that motivate people, that people
Mhm.
relate to, that inspire people. So they
Mhm.
are very important in that sense, as far as even just simply for health and welfare of a people. So they've always
Yeah.
been intertwined. I mean, people of course know the futurist movement in Italy, which you could also say there are, it wasn't very popular in Germany, let's just say. But you still had these you still had these artistic expressions
That's
and
that's more about the difference between Italians and Germans, I think, culturally. But
yeah.
I
Oh yeah,
perhaps,
that's what I'm yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. But
yeah,
that
agree.
thrived in an environment like Italy where you had all different kind of forms that represented, the Italian past and history and the future of it all intertwined in their art and paying homage to Italianism. It's that
Mm,
expression of them completely unique to them.
wow.
It's always been a more artistic kind of or at least understood the impact of art more so than liberalism of today. When you see what this art is, it's yeah,
Mhm, mhm.
it's very
Well,
hollow, right?
yeah, I'm trying to connect it to American art. Specifically, obviously, people in the West and different countries can think that through for their own countries. But in America, I think back to around the 1930s, public mural art had this kind of heroic, nationalist spirit to it. There were a lot of sort of nationalist eagles, kind of like a Art Nouveau style. It was a time before nationalism became a bad word in America. I think, and, maybe
Yeah.
that didn't really start until maybe the '60s, actually. But yeah, because I want to find a resource for myself specifically, but obviously others in, let's say, the White Art Collective and beyond, to start creating new American nationalist art, or perhaps new American fascist art. Let me quickly hand the mic over to Nullis, though, and see if he has any comments or questions for you on that topic.
Actually, no. I mean, you just continue. I'm just listening, and I'm kind of becoming a part of the audience because this is really great. I have no other comments to make right now.
It's a very enjoyable conversation. Yeah. So then, CT, let me ask you, what's your impression of the arts inside the white identitarian movement?
Well, I'll be honest with you. Like I said, I'm very novice in the art. Most
Mm.
of the quote unquote art I've witnessed is through the memes. which I
Okay.
just view as forms of propaganda, which is art, which we agree.
Right.
But as far as like artistic creators, for the sake of expression of I am not too aware of that, of kind of, once again, would you advocate this in your essay that there needs to be kind of this reclaiming of art,
Mm, mm,
period, and with masculine ethos of beauty, things like this. So it's if there's artists out there producing paintings like this or things like that, then I'm probably not aware of it. What I'm most aware of are the people that create music, and they do it for, ideological reasons for the most part,
yeah.
but it's swayed towards, whether it's a pro-white thing or anything else, it's swayed towards a
Hmm.
specific message in order to track someone to that message or
Yeah.
make them at
Yeah.
least think about it. And same with the memes and whatnot. It's some of it can be very artistic, some of it can be very simple, but make a very
Hmm.
strong point at the same time. I I, I
Hmm.
did. This is another thing that we noticed, like after 2016, these meme factories started coming out, and it started using kind of the form of art propaganda that the left had been using for a very long time against people on the quote unquote right, and it kind of flipped after 16. Like the winners of the people making the symbols, like I said, whether how simplistic they were or not, is like what they represented, the message they said or the message they ridiculed, that that started gaining a lot of traction with people. And you could see the power of art there, even with something simplistic as that, which once again, there could be a pro and con to that as well. But even through something as simplistic as that, it spoke volumes to people. And this is why, like, there's a whole culture now built around simply memes, when they
Hmm.
were really coming to, their pinnacle when it was about this political message or about mocking the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So just a quick mention, there's so many amazing musicians specifically in the White Art Collective. Olivia Key, White from Northern Ireland, to name two. There's very many of them. And the message is very much about white positivity. It's not specifically about, say, political ideologies, etc. But I feel that clearly it's obviously connected and part of
Mhm.
the entire culture. But yeah, I'm just very interested to see what where in your mind those connections are, and more so, what is your advice for us? So does that do you feel like you've answered that question?
Well, I guess, but the advice would be, because once again, I'm not aware of the people that are like you just mentioned.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I look at it. I mean, this is probably my problem. I look at everything, I guess, under Machiavellian lens. I mean, so it's my my advice is, yeah, it's I look at the art as more use as propaganda right now for
Okay.
getting across a message. That idealism you're
Yeah.
talking about, tapping into
Got it.
that and making this character of who we could become,
Mhm.
if we just
Beautiful.
went on the right path.
I have a song called "Become Who You Are," which is something that maybe I should link into the show and in the show notes. Let's turn our attention to the essay now. This is the
Donald, I just
Imperium.
wanted to make a
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I just wanted to add something really, really quickly that to all of this. I think that it's worth noting that over the past few years, you've seen a strong resurgence uh, of literature, of poetry. I'm not just trying to sort of plug my own stuff, but really a lot of great poets are popping up all over the place. Excellent works of fiction are being written, and you have a lot of talented artists that are growing in our community. Regardless of what their particular ideological bent is, I think that the goal and the expression are very similar, and I think they're all worth supporting. I think that you have a very strong understanding of something has to be done, quote unquote. And I think that what's most important in the artistic expression, but also in the political expression, is to have a civilizational vision, to have a view of the future, an understanding of where we want to go. And I think that all of this is gradually evolving and starting to slowly coalesce into an understanding beyond the arguments and debates that everyone's having. And I think the debates, to a certain extent, as long as it doesn't become, it doesn't go overboard, has a very strong value in helping us understand these things. So you have, for example, artists that are speaking about, this right now on the Bard channel on Telegram. There's a contest now on the warrior poet, for example. So now people will be submitting poems that go along that theme. Or you just had the Passage Prize recently, where people were just submitting. I think there were about 20,000 different types of works of art submitted, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
And again, I don't know if maybe I'm no 20,000 was the prize. I'm sorry, but it was several thousand people. Not 20,000 for the first place. I wish it was, but no, it's for the total pool. But suffice it to say that there were several, I believe, several thousand people or works were submitted, and so there's a vibrant growth going on, and I think a lot of that has to do with your channel, Culture Thug, our channel, what the White Art Collective is doing, what guys like Tyler Hamilton is doing, when they're talking about these different philosophies and different philosophical approaches and understanding these things. All of these different groups are, and I see this overlap all the time. And I really believe that we need a certain amount of time to evolve in it. Now, getting back to what you said earlier, do we have that time? I don't know. I'm not sure we have enough time, but it's growing rapidly. And I think that, that to me is a very positive sign. And I think that we have to work on this and fuel this fire, this creative fire. And so I just wanted to add that comment to all of this.
Yeah, that's one thing that the debate shows, though. I mean, they've largely become like sports ball now. It's unfortunate. It's kind of degraded to where it's just cheerleaders from each side, and I don't know how many people actually get convinced through the debate model, online debate style at least. But all these things are growing. I do see that too, and I didn't even think about that. All the book companies that are popping up now and printing people that can't get printed by the mainstream. Yeah, that is true. That's a great sign as well.
Wow. So let's talk about the Imperium Art essay that Nullis wrote. You have some questions. Maybe you want to start off with some comments. Let us know what you thought of the essay.
Well, I enjoyed it. I thought it was concise. It laid everything out. I like the whole elements of Imperium art, all 6 points, and going into it. Like, so back to the churches, just real fast, I guess for my own curiosity, did that start in America? Was that the first places where they kind of started with the, I don't know, lack of spirit, the kind of cookie cutter mentality with this? And did that start in America with the Protestants, or?
I think no, it started in Europe. I think
Was it
that
in
there
Europe?
was,
Okay.
yeah. I think that this. I mean, I don't want to hurt my Protestant brothers here, but it did start. It did start with the Protestant. What's the word I'm looking for?
Is it
How they
not allowing images in their churches and that kind of?
Yeah, how they right, the whole guide towards being plain and simple, and which to them represented a certain kind of austere morality. But in a sense, I think that's really the impetus of it. But I think that a lot of this you really saw it more in the 20th century, but I think it happened both in Europe and America roughly at about the same time. But if anyone has a better understanding of this, I'm more happy. I'm more than happy to let them comment on it. But I see it that way at least.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering because I couldn't think. I thought, did this start in America? But yeah, there's probably same mentality in Europe. But like you said, around the same time, right? It was
Roughly,
the same era.
Yeah.
Also, what I found interesting, specifically about the article, was the take on Romanticism, that art period. And which you used a quote from T.E. Hume. Is that how you
Yes.
say his name? Okay.
Yes.
And it's kind of he says what? It's a split religion. I've written
Yep.
down here. Yes. So to me, I thought the Romantic period, the few paintings I have on my wall come from the Romantic period. Is it that because I guess I don't want to say deifies man, but I guess deifies man is the way to go. Was that the split? That, and then what do you guys think about that period at all? Because in the article, it's basically says we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater on this period, but
Correct.
just pointing out this transition, I guess, as it's happening, I guess. So yeah, what would your guys like? Explain that to me, the thought behind the Romantic period and what you guys think about its representation and everything.
Well, to me, the romantic. First of all, the romantic period has a lot of value to it. So I'm not, and as I wrote in the essay, I don't want to throw out the baby with the
Yeah.
bathwater. There's a lot of value that we can, and there's a lot of excellent examples from which we can learn from that period. The problem I see, as again what Hume was saying as well, is that the elevation of man above the divinity, above something that's greater than ourselves, if you will, above God, from a more religious point of view. Um, when you elevate man as the focal point, and man is fallible, man is not perfect, it's an imperfect being, but you're trying to force perfection on an imperfect being, then what you get is this kind of a when you have no religion, then you find a new way to express that religion in some other way, right? And many people talk about this in many different ways, and I think Hume was also touching upon this, where when you're elevating man, then what you're getting is this kind of confusion and conflation of what divinity is and what humanity is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you look at the over romanticization of man, you also tend to not be objective about yourself. You're not looking at yourself with a realistic lens. You're also putting yourself in a position where you become vulnerable, because if you don't look in the mirror on an individual level, and you don't have any humility to understand that you can make mistakes, then if you idolize yourself, or if you if you idolize yourself and you do make mistakes, then that can be devastating to you. And I think that when we do this on a societal level, on a cultural level, and I'm very careful about this, because I do believe that we have to have these very strong ideals set before us, and I think Romanticism does an excellent job with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also believe that we need to have something to balance this Romanticism out, and I think that Romanticism didn't balance it out properly. I hope that made sense.
Okay, no, it does. It does. It explained it. And I'm definitely, because it's funny, someone asked me the other night on a stream, have I ever read T.S. Eliot? I'm like, no, I have not. So I quickly purchased Essays, Ancient and Modern. I found a used one on Amazon. I quickly purchased that after reading this essay, because it felt like that would be a good explanation for me, at least to have a little more understanding on this topic and kind of the transitions of that art has gone through and what it represents. So I do thank you guys for that. It got me a new book now to read from
Cool.
this, and to know a little more about this topic.
Mhm.
One last thing about the article, and just because I'm a stickler for this topic as being the big defender of the state here,
Mhm.
I'm going to quote from the topic here, and I'll preface this with I think we're saying the same thing, just in a different manner with this.
Mhm.
But it says the individual is not defined by the state, nor is the state defined by the individual. Instead, the state is merely a manifestation of the organic representation of a collective ethnos, logos, and mythos.
Mhm.
While the form of the state may change over time, the underlying organic nation evolves along a continuous path.
Mhm.
So, but I believe that 100%, but to me, that's the state represents the people. It's the people define the state essentially, right? Because that
Can
is
I?
the part of our expression. Yeah.
I want
Yeah,
to,
yeah, and
if
go.
I may, I just jump in real fast. I really feel that we're now living, or and have been living, in a state in which state and all its tentacles, so to speak, are mutating the people. That
Hmm.
we're I mean, we're that's a huge topic. Certainly in the cities, we know about the CIA's infiltration to starting kind of like the hippie movement, the feminist movement, and you know all that very major change culturally, where and then of course the television, movies, etc., has gradually become more and more, and now it's grotesquely obvious that it's kind of leftist propaganda. And there's of course other policies that are created that are more political and economic, but as far as culture goes, I think that we're being mutated, by the state. And so the state is no longer, or it is, I don't know if I can say no longer, but it certainly is not an expression, in my opinion, of the people. And it's part of it is, there's something coming from the kind of state-run narrative in our media that is super divisive, obviously, separate the people to conquer. Um, and that's not just racial, that's obviously ideological, et cetera, religious, et cetera. But and then teaching children to kind of, I don't be like wards of the state, or that whole obsession with technology. There's very, very battles that are being fought against whites and even non-whites in America specifically, and of course the Western world. So you know, I feel like, and then now we have transhumanism right around the corner, right on the horizon. The merging of
Hmm.
man and machine. So there's a rapid change if you look at it from a historical point of view, where the state has become this kind of matrix machine that is going to our cultural DNA and reprogramming us, redesigning us, making people stupid, dumbing people down, teaching people narratives that are false and anti-white, anti-liberty, etc., anti-constitutional. And and then, I could go on and on. I don't want to get like sort of preachy about it, but that I think that this is a topic that's critical and almost a fulcrum to the whole conversation of how what's the relationship between fascism and Imperium art. That
Yep.
artists we're fighting a cultural war, for our spirit, our culture, our identity, our society, our families. And so, the answer I'm hearing from you is focus on propaganda art and symbolisms and things of this. So,
Hmm.
that's just kind
If
of
I could,
I need to go ahead, Nolis.
yeah, I just wanted to, because I this is an important point that I want to connect to this question of layers of identity that I've been talking about a few times in the past, where my personal belief is that we need to be aware of who we are. We need to understand the community in which we live. We need to have a connection to our community, our family. We need to have a connection to our faith. We have to have an understanding of this metaphysical reality, and balance it out with our corporeal reality. We have to find this understanding of who we are before we can even go to that phase of understanding which structure works best. Now, again, I'm not trying to say that the fascist model isn't a good model in this sense, and that it isn't representative of the people. But my concern is always that if we don't have a strong moral foundation, if we don't have a strong understanding of self, then even the best models can ultimately then wither away if there's no, if there's no continuity involved in the people, that in the underlying foundation. And so that's where I think we have to work hard. We have to essentially look at the structure of ourselves before we can look at the structure of our society, if you will. And this is especially important now, because now we're living, as Donald was saying, in this transhumanist world where, if you can make that point of saying that the Enlightenment, liberalism tore man away from God, if you will, and now transhumanism, this postmodern dystopia, is tearing man away from himself. And so there's this urgency, I think, that we need to focus on the foundations. But again, how much time do we have to only focus on the foundations? I think that all of this has to be done simultaneously. All of this has to be done in a way where we work together and find the practical solutions, the foundational solutions, and the artistic expression that accompanies this. So it's a difficult formula, I know, but I think that like you said, the debate model is probably not the best for everyone, and you're probably right about that. So maybe the collaborative methodology would be a lot better in going forward. So I think that's something that I would look at. I would say that if I don't know who I am, if I don't know who my family is, if I don't know where I come from, then how do I know where I'm going? And I think that's really the point I want to make.
Yeah, which is obviously very important. But that is, first, I should have said the statement better. A healthy state is going to be one that represents the people. But yes, obviously, this state today is completely insane and destructive. Yeah, so yeah, without a doubt. But yes, a healthy one should be one that represents the people and is influenced by the culture and the creation and the wellspring of those people. But obviously, we do not have that today. It's corporate oligarchy.
Yeah, and I would also add to this that the example, for example, if you look at the Poles, they were ruled over by the Germans on the west and the Russians on the east for centuries, but they always remained Poles. And even the Austrians had a nice chunk too. So but they were split in three for centuries, but they still remained Poles. They didn't change. It was only the state that was above them essentially that changed over time. So you also look at that organic expression, or if you look at Italy. Italy was a number of city-states for centuries, and was there an Italian awareness? I would argue there was. I would argue that even going back beyond Machiavelli. Even in the Renaissance, early Renaissance, they were talking about an Italian identity. So it was there. It was always there, regardless of what state structures were above them. Nationalism in the 19th century, in the late 18th and 19th century, is simply just a political expression of the organic reality. I always argue that nationalism is a primordial understanding of self. But whether we call it nationalism or whether we call it by our nations is, to me, irrelevant. It's still the same thing.
I think the catch-22 today, though, about learning who we are, to help make the decisions or knows what truly benefits us, is we live in a day and age. So you bring up Poland and Italy, they still lived in a time where their community, their culture, their history, everyone was very intact with this. So you can have this different city states, but they all knew they were Italian, and they all knew what that meant and the history of that. We here in America specifically, I can't speak for Europe, but definitely for Americans, and specifically towards white Americans, that they literally have to learn, put in the time of self-awareness and self-exploration,
right,
and to find out, because people have essentially forgotten who they were. And so that's a learning process that unfortunately a lot of people don't seem to want to invest the time to actually figure these things out. Like, who am outside of just this American consumer? Who am I really?
right.
And maybe that gives you your purpose once you figure that out, and your connection, and you understand whether there's your family, your community, your ethnicity, your religion, etc., of what drives you or what represents you the best.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's interesting. I'm first generation. My parents are from Hungary originally. And when I was growing up, and I'm somewhat older, I don't want to say that I'm very old, although Donald might think I am.
Young at heart, my man. Young at heart.
But no, all jokes aside, when I was growing up, the goal was to assimilate into American society. You kept your ethnic background. I mean, I grew up in an ethnic community. I grew up uh, keeping that flame alive. But in the greater society, when I interacted with anyone who was non-Hungarian, then it was expected that you assimilate. It was expected that you assimilate into the greater whole of what it meant to be an American. And this is going back a few, well, okay, I'm not going to say how old I am, but a few decades. And anyway, the point I'm trying to make is back then, what it meant to be an American was implicitly, it meant that you were white. That's what it meant. You know, a large percentage of the population, I would say over 90% of the population back then was white. And so when you said an American, everybody understood that meant somebody of European descent. There were no hyphenated Americans back then. You were either an American or you were not an American. So the hyphenated American idea sort of started out with the European ethnicities. I'll acknowledge that much. Like when you said Irish American or Italian American or what have you. But that was more of kind of a tribal, I would say, you know, kind of a brotherly competition, if you will. But there was no deeper meaning attributed to that other than I represent my culture in this community. It didn't mean that you oppressed me or I oppressed you or whatever. It didn't have any kind of political content. It was more of a cultural expression. And today, it's a completely different animal. So now I think the problem is that the average American kind of took it for granted that being an American meant being white or being of European descent. And now we're kind of faced with confronting this question of what does it mean to be an American at all?
Well, yeah. And like you said, it's two completely different worlds. And it's interesting that can exist in this short period of time. But it does. That's why we're at the stage now where, people don't even know. So like it's something that was commonly kind of maybe not even understood, but acknowledged at one extent or another by the people now is completely something people have to relearn now or learn for the first time in most cases with people so, I mean, I think that's kind of why we see kind of all the growing pains we've been having in this whole dissident, section, no matter what each person's, personal belief is. We've had these growing pains because, yes, most people don't understand themselves. Most people don't understand how this affects them or how this is actually alien to them. They think this is normal, essentially.
Yeah. How can you have a civilizational destiny when you don't even know who you are?
Yeah.
That's
it took me reading history.
Yeah.
It took me reading history to realize, like, oh, life was not always like this. There were things that mattered much more than what matters today. And it's part back to the state. It's, do you create the environment where people will learn, or will this organically happen? I think it's probably a little bit of both, but it definitely helps if you create the environment to encourage this or help people along that path.
Yeah, and I might say, and the march.
Yes, they do.
Yeah,
and sometimes I'm going to say something controversial now, but sometimes the state has to protect the people from themselves.
Yes, I'm a firm believer in that. Yes,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm musing on that because it's a weird cycle where currently in many ways you could say the state mutated us and made us a danger to ourselves. So like I could see in another time, another context, in like the best case scenario, the state say coming in and like the fentanyl problem. America, for starters, it's manufactured in China. It's sold through the Mexican gangs that the government is letting in the hundreds of thousands. That's the opposite of the government protecting the people from themselves, for example.
Yes.
But to pull it back to the art discussion, because there's a million concepts going on here, and I'm like. It's like I'm keeping a beehive here. I'm trying to get all the bees in one place, and get all these points to converge so that we have a message and kind of something to walk away with. And it seems
I should add something, Donald. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I do have to say one thing here, which is that we have to be careful. When I say that the state has to protect the people from themselves, before you do that, you have to have a high trust society. You have to have a strong moral foundation. You have to have a strong cultural bond and structure. You have to have an understanding of identity, because if you don't have that, then the state will take advantage of that and will utilize those methodologies of protecting, quote unquote, protecting the people against themselves. And then it would then go into the direction of a tyranny. And so what we have to be careful is not to go into that direction. And that's why these fundamental moral questions and these fundamental structures are so important.
So what I'm hearing is that identity is the precursor for unity, which is
My
just another
opinion,
word
yes.
for kind of fascism in a sense, right? So
Mhm.
it seems then the mission of Imperium art should be to clarify and embolden our identity, and obviously we're in the white identitarian sphere, so we're advocating for whites and our history, culture, etc. That's our job, that's what we do, and there's insane amounts of anti-whiteism out there pouring out everywhere all day every day. And so we're so small in terms of like our impact and our reach, but we're so dangerous to the establishment, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so that's a lot of power. And so and problem here that I wanted to add to this conversation is how we're broken off from our history, and therefore we don't know our identity. The way I introduced this whole show, like, thought I use the word fascism the way everybody does, which is really what they mean to say is authoritarianism.
Yeah.
Like where somebody like overreaches their power, and our government is overreaching power absurdly now, and a lot of governments do, but we don't, we don't say they're fascist. It's a stupid misuse of the word. It's an ignorant misuse of the word. But I believe that it's in somehow or other somebody must have been behind the twisting of that dialectic. I can't prove that, but whatever it is, we're kind of trying to just educate people and say, listen, if you deny your history because you're scared of these words, then you are a gatekeeper and you are cutting us, our people, Western kind, off from our history. And there's massive amounts of art and philosophy and aesthetics and esoterics and policy and so many great things to tap into if we only connect back to our history. So words are important. Words are powerful. And if you kowtow to the left and you abandon, oh, well, it's too late. The left is taking over that. And so, okay, we got to come up with new words or something or other. I think it's a good debate to have, because I see our political struggle as a spectrum, and everybody has a place and a purpose on that spectrum. If you look at, say, somebody where, like, say, Alex Jones is the ceiling and they can't go any farther than that, and then maybe they discover Nick Fuentes and they go, and wow, this is so based and Roy propelled, and then that becomes the ceiling. And then the next phase might be, fill in the blank and fill in and phase. And where it all funnels down to, I believe, is this. It's this kind of nationalism and fascist nationalism. I could be wrong. I think that people can debate me on that. I think it's an exciting question, but in a sense, the end of the road back to the West is exactly this. So this is why I've become fascinated with it. This is probably the direction American Zarathustra is going to go in 2022, and it's a reason why I had you on the show. And so I hope that we can have more dialogue and more connection in some way or other. Now, I'm my own person. I'm not the shadow of another person. I don't belong to any kind of cult of personality or I'm just me. I've got my little slot, I fill a niche, and I love everybody in our sphere. I respect their differences, and I just, all of it is a spectrum. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. And it seems to be the question then, well, how do we pull people more down that spectrum? And how does that play a role in terms of politics? Because we're talking about populism, right? And the importance of populism. So that means numbers. We've got to get more numbers.
Yeah.
How many, if you look at, say, I don't know, Alex Jones's numbers compared to, I don't know, my numbers. There's
Right.
no comparison. So, I feel like perhaps that's one of the missions of the arts, is that we should try to be more populist in a sense. Can it work? I don't know. I mean, should we target just, say, the spectrum right next to where we are, or should we go a little farther down the line? Should we try to red pill normies, which I've had massive amounts of success with over many years. And they didn't make it all the way to the end of the road here where we are, because I don't know what's right of this, to be honest. I don't know. Maybe something super esoteric, I guess. But anyway, yeah. What are your thoughts on that, CT?
Well, yeah, 100% first. Yes, we'll have future conversations. I look forward to them. I'm glad to hear you're exploring that option because, like I said, I've been a fanatic for it for years. I do think it is the only way to materialize something that can actually threaten the power that exists today. But as far as the art in particular goes, I would say, like I say, with all our differences we have, like you said, on the spectrum, I say all roads lead to Rome at the end. So we're all taking these
Yes.
paths, but
Right.
they all lead to Rome. So same with the art scene. Why couldn't you have all of the above? Art that speaks to people maybe more adjacent with us, and then art that speaks to the normie, and just have, like you said, reclaim the culture is the mission that art is upon now, to reclaim that culture. And that culture involves a lot of people that probably would hate people, like literally hate people like us now, even though their best intention is in our heart. And so it's reaching out to those people through art. And then, as like I said, as far as getting the message to grow, we will never grow to be an Alex Jones, not even a Nick Fuentes. Anyone on this far to, what they call the right, is never going to get that kind of freedom. You're never going to be able to breathe that long on these platforms they own. I say it needs to go offline and more into the real world. And we're starting to see that too now. We're starting to see like what we're doing at New Frontier, what groups like the National Justice Party are doing, what groups like Patriot Front are doing. Now, all of us have our own beliefs and kind of going at our own way, but it's coming from off the internet into real life. And I think the more of that we have, and then eventually I have to believe sooner or later, as one way or another proves successful, people will coalesce there just like they did with Trump. Same thing. And we've seen this play out in history too. It's always fractioned off into a bunch of different groups until one thing can come forward that starts attracting people. Like, okay, I don't agree with everything they say, but I agree with most of it. And they seem to be on the best path now. And eventually reaching that is the hope I get if more of us just go into real life and kind of put these things out there and try to manifest this into reality.
I'm working on a new show for American Zarathustra called Think Tank, and I'm starting it out on my Telegram right now. And the concept of that is to literally come up with the right questioning strategies to start creating our own, associations, foundations, things in real life where institutions, anything that gives us power over ourselves. So it's because, like I said to you before the show started, I'm really, I was considering retiring American Zarathustra because
no,
my buddy, but the whole sphere is just talk shows. And I love it. It's my home. I mean, I'm not knocking that, but I feel in some kind of way, if it's not leading towards, like, are we just going to repeat everything we did last year? I mean, come on, guys, we've got to break it out. We've got to get out in the real world in any way possible. And my angle is more culture building, group building, and economics. I've had this concept of a kind of like a cultural fair or a patriot convention where you can have like a farmer's market and then, use that as a platform, for example, to say, bring in, say, booksellers like Antelope Hill or White People's Press or et cetera, and bring in aspects of our culture and our ideas into just something that's normie friendly and that looks, that has, I guess, good optics, or not. Maybe that's not the way. Maybe we need to be more focused on creating something more intense than that. That's what
Donald,
the thing is about.
Donald,
Yes.
I wanted to add to this that we number one, and I've said it a few times before, we should never underestimate the average Joe and their agency. There's a million and one reasons why they're not expressing themselves openly. That doesn't mean that they don't know what's going on. Furthermore, there's also the issue of where do you draw the line, right? So what's permissible today was taboo only 10 years ago, and I could go further back. And so where do people say enough? Now, I've said enough a long time ago, but the average person is capitulating on a regular basis, and there's going to be a point where they're going to stop capitulating, whether that's because of economic issues, whether that's because of social issues, whether that's because of moral issues. But there will be a point where all of these, the average Joe who already knows, they're aware of what's going on. They might have to say it's time for me to just stand up and say, no, I'm not going to take this anymore. And so when that happens in a greater, let's just say in a greater number, then our responsibility as artists, as social commentators, as political movements, as philosophical movements, as intellectual thinkers, what have you, our job is to provide answers for them when they finally come to that point to say enough. And so for us to, and I've always encouraged, first of all, I don't think that people should be escaping cities. They should be standing their ground if they can. Of course, I understand family issues, and I also understand how people don't want to raise their families in a toxic environment. So I'm not trying to advocate for that, but I do believe that running to the hills will not save us. They're going to follow us no matter where we go.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't form communities. That also doesn't mean that people shouldn't be active locally. I advocate for local action, but I think that what Cultured Thug is also saying is very important, where you want to also act on the federal level. You want to make a presence, even if you know that it's not going to be a viable, at least for the time being, not going to be a viable political platform for most people because they've had these knee-jerk reactions to certain terms. But as that changes, as things get more desperate, as people start losing their jobs, they lose their houses, they lose their livelihoods, they can't support their families, and it go on and on. They're going to start looking for answers, and they're going to say, nobody's been giving me an answer, but this guy, he's talking about something that I know is right, or that artist is representing something I agree with. And you're going to see this. We have to also have faith in our own people in a way. And then I think that the point of us, what we're doing now is extremely vital. It's extremely important because what we're doing now is providing that foundation for that identity that will ultimately lead to the movements of the future.
I 100% agree, but that's why it is so important to get involved and become that voice or become that representation, because as things get worse, there's going to be the same other people who have all the money who are going to come around and say, oh, we'll fix this. And they'll have the loudest voice. Right. So my fear is that they'll just keep astroturfing us and being able to speak to the people much more than we can, or have more access to them. And people will keep falling for that. Like, oh, here's another promise of, they just did it with Biden, with like, he's going to give everyone universal health care. And then they voted for him thinking he's going to give them universal health care. Hey, guess what? You don't got universal health care, people. Right. You do hope for a time one thing I think I got going for me that people think I'm insane for thinking that I could run or anything is that I am rough around the edges. You know, I am not a clean, squeaky politician. Don't have a
Yeah.
clean history
Squeaky
or
clean.
anything like that. Yeah, squeaky clean. Yeah, I got tongue tied there. History or anything like that. But what I do have is authenticity, and I think people are going to get more desperate for true authenticity. I think people thought Trump was that, and
Right.
that's what was so attractive about him. And a lot of people
Mhm.
learned he was not that. But I still think people are hungry. Like you said, don't underestimate these people. They might not know exactly what they want, but
Right.
if they hear a truth speaker, especially in a time where things are not working out to their advantage, they will listen to that person and they will say, you know, he's at least saying the truth. Okay, he's not the perfect politician, but
Mhm.
he is someone who's a fighter, you know,
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and I
In
absolutely
some
agree with you. I'm
in some
sorry.
kind of
I didn't
way,
want to.
so let me just jump in. In some kind of way, Trump was like maybe the best thing that he did for us was to recreate that American populism, to bring back
yeah,
American spirit, if you will, and then has become a model for other people who are not dedicated to Israel, for example. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
we should take the good and reuse it in some way and form it in our own way. I did want to say, I usually go about an hour. We're in about an hour and a half. That we could go on and on. So I just want to see
Mhm.
if we can. I think we've come to some conclusion on Imperium art and your views on it. It's certainly a big conversation, and we always the doors open. We'll probably have to do something again in the future, CT. So
Definitely.
Yes.
yeah, we'll talk more about it. I think really that we planted a lot of seeds tonight, and I'm extremely grateful to the audience, the people in the chat that have had some really interesting and challenging ideas. It's always on the people who watch the show to have the responsibility to get this media out there, to share, subscribe, comment, get involved in what we're doing. These quote talk shows don't mean anything if they exist in a void. You have to share the media and kind of, especially to people who are new to these concepts. That was part of the strategy of the way I started this show, was to ask super simple questions to clarify what it is fascism is, why it's good for America and any country, frankly, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, CT, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, just I enjoyed this very much. And they can find me on YouTube at New Frontier on YouTube, the channel
Mhm,
there. And
mhm.
yeah, check it out and see what we're doing and support us if you like the fight we're trying to wage.
Indeed. You've got a fantastic book section there on your site, by the way. I'm going to need to get a couple of those books. So help them out. This is part of how this all works, is that we have to, kind of speak with our money a little bit as well. And
Mhm.
there's so much good content there, the books and things like that. Maybe there could be some kind of an art sales relationship possibly in the just something that, my
That
creative
would be
mind is thinking
awesome.
about.
Yeah, that would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so, Nullis, any closing thoughts?
I just wanted to thank you, CT, for being with us on this episode. It was a phenomenal conversation, and I think we touched upon some really, really important topics. And
Mm,
thank you again. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
fantastic. All right. Thanks again. So, newfrontier.org, it's on the screen. It'll be in the show notes. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and have a blessed day or evening. We'll see you next time.